Major Klaus Richter tapped his sharpened pencil against the mahogany desk, the sound echoing off the concrete walls of the bunker like a metronome counting down to certainty. The air was thick with stale cigar smoke and the acrid scent of mimeograph ink, the perfume of command in the 5th year of war. Before him lay intelligence reports from Army Group B, their crisp paper weighted with columns of figures that told an inescapable story. His fingers traced the numbers with the reverence of a priest reading scripture. An armored division consumed 150,000 gallons of fuel daily. Patton's Third Army had advanced 400 miles from the Normandy beachheads. The nearest Allied supply depots remained at Cherbourg and the artificial Mulberry harbors. The mathematics were as immutable as the laws of thermodynamics. The coffee in his tin cup had gone cold hours ago, but Richter didn't notice. Outside, beyond the reinforced walls, August rain drummed against the East Prussian forest. Inside, the low hum of diesel generators provided a constant bass note to the symphony of Germany's collapsing war effort. Maps covered every surface: France, Belgium, the approaches to the Rhine. Each one told the same story in the language Richter understood best: distance, tonnage, consumption rates, replacement times. They have outrun their supply lines, he thought, allowing himself a thin smile. The Americans have made the classic mistake. Napoleon made it. We made it in Russia. Now they will learn what every military academy teaches: logistics determines everything. He had seen this pattern before. In the winter of 1941, watching from a command post as German tanks sat immobilized outside Moscow, their fuel frozen, their ammunition exhausted. The Blitzkrieg had worked brilliantly across Poland and France: compact distances, excellent roads, prepared supply depots. But Russia had taught the hard lesson: speed without sustainability equals paralysis. The Americans, for all their industrial might, were about to learn the same truth in the hedgerows of Normandy and the plains of France. Physical laws cannot be violated, Richter said aloud to Lieutenant Vogel, the young signals officer hovering near the door. Not by American optimism, not by their mechanical toys. An army of 200,000 men requires 700 tons of supplies daily. Patton has that army, spread across 400 miles, connected by a single road network we've systematically destroyed. The calculation is inescapable. Vogel shifted uncomfortably. Sir, the latest aerial reconnaissance from Aufklärungsgruppe 116 shows what we predicted, Richter interrupted. American vehicles clustering around their forward positions, static, waiting. Within 48 hours, Patton's advance will grind to a complete halt. He will sit there, fuel tanks empty, while we reinforce the west wall. It's inevitable. He returned to his report, making final notations in his precise handwriting. The document would go to Field Marshal Model, then to Berlin. It would confirm what every officer who had studied logistics already knew. The Americans had overextended. Their famous mobility had become their fatal weakness. The tyranny of distance would accomplish what the Wehrmacht's depleted forces could not. It would stop George Patton's tanks cold. History teaches us what comes next, Richter thought, signing his name at the bottom of the analysis. Paralysis, regrouping, the loss of momentum that determines campaigns. What Major Klaus Richter, General Oberst Alfred Jodl, and the entire German staff didn't know, couldn't know, refused to know, was that 125 miles away, an answer to their calculations was already rolling eastward. 5,958 trucks. An endless convoy that would soon shatter every assumption they held about mechanized warfare, military science, and the very nature of industrial civilization. The arithmetic was about to change, and with it, everything. The believer. Klaus Richter had been born into certainty. Not the certainty of wealth. His father was a railway clerk in Stuttgart, but the certainty of order, system, and German excellence. He had entered the War Academy in 1928, one of the 100 cadets selected from thousands of applicants. The Reichswehr trained its officers to think in terms of mathematical precision. Logistics wasn't poetry, it was engineering. You calculated tonnage per kilometer, fuel consumption per hour, replacement rates per month. If you did the math correctly, you won. If you didn't, you lost. The Polish campaign in 1939 had confirmed everything. 19 days. The Wehrmacht had crushed an entire nation in less than 3 weeks through meticulous planning and ruthless execution. Richter, then a captain in charge of fuel distribution for the 4th Panzer Division, had watched his calculations translate into reality with beautiful precision. Every truck arrived when scheduled. Every fuel dump was positioned exactly where needed. The Poles had bravery but no logistics, and they died for it. France in 1940 was the masterpiece. The thrust through the Ardennes, declared impossible by French generals, succeeded because German planners had calculated everything. Road capacities, bridge load limits, fuel consumption through forest terrain. When the panzers broke through at Sedan, Richter's supply columns were already positioned to exploit the breach. 46 days later, France had surrendered. The German military machine was validated as the finest instrument of war the world had ever seen. But Russia changed things. Richter had arrived at Army Group Center in July 1941, promoted to major and assigned to logistics coordination. The invasion was going brilliantly on maps. Minsk fell, Smolensk fell, the road to Moscow lay open. But Richter saw the numbers changing. Distances in Russia weren't measured in kilometers, but in infinities. Roads weren't roads, but suggestions. A panzer division that could advance 60 miles per day in France managed 20 in Russia. Then 10. Then none at all. The winter of 1941-42 taught the lesson in blood and frostbite. Richter spent those months in a frozen schoolhouse, watching divisions starve because horses couldn't pull supply wagons through meter-deep snow, watching tanks sit immobilized not from Soviet shells, but from lack of antifreeze. The Wehrmacht had brought 3 months of supplies for a campaign they assumed would last 6 weeks. When the campaign lasted 3 years, the arithmetic became a death sentence. He had learned. The entire general staff had learned. Logistics determined everything. Speed without supply was suicide. You could have the best tactics, the bravest soldiers, the most brilliant commanders, but if your supply line broke, you lost. This was the lens through which Richter viewed the war in August 1944.
The Americans had landed in Normandy with overwhelming force, that was undeniable. Their material superiority was equally undeniable. But now they had outrun their logistics, just as Germany had in Russia. The pattern was repeating. History was rhyming. In the map room at Rostenburg, he argued this thesis daily to anyone who would listen. Oberst Werner Schmidt, a decorated veteran of Stalingrad with a Knight's Cross and a permanent limp, was his most frequent opponent. "You underestimate American stupidity," Schmidt said, stabbing his finger at the map of France. "They think their trucks can replace military planning. They believe money solves everything. When reality hits, they'll panic." Schmidt represented the old guard, officers who had won in Poland and France and believed German superiority was inherent, almost mystical. He dismissed intelligence about American production numbers as propaganda. "The Jews control their media," he'd say with a wave of his hand. "They exaggerate everything to demoralize us." But Richter was a man of numbers, not ideology, and the numbers from the West were troubling. German logistics in France relied on 80% horse-drawn transport. The Wehrmacht possessed approximately 5,000 trucks across all of Army Group B, older models, constantly breaking down, cannibalized for parts. Fuel allocation per division had been cut to 25% of doctrinal requirements. Artillery units fired 50 shells per day when their tables called for 500. Every decision was constrained by scarcity. American logistics reports, the ones Richter trusted, compiled from multiple independent sources, painted a different picture. Nearly 100% motorization, divisions that consumed 700 to 1,000 tons of supplies daily and actually received them. Casual wastage of ammunition that would constitute a month's allocation for a German corps. The most striking comparison was truck production. Germany's entire automotive industry had produced perhaps 120,000 military vehicles in 1943, spread across all types. The Americans had produced over 600,000 trucks that same year. Just trucks. The GMC CCKW 2.5-ton alone accounted for hundreds of thousands of units, more than Germany's entire military vehicle fleet. But production doesn't matter if you can't deliver it, Richter told himself in the quiet moments. And they can't. The distances are too great. The road network is too damaged. The principle of diminishing returns applies to everyone, even Americans. This was the comfortable delusion. The Americans were rich, but tactically naive. They had machines, but lacked the German genius for operations. They would learn, painfully, that warfare was about more than assembly lines. Richter believed this because he needed to believe it. Because the alternative, that American industrial capacity could simply overwhelm German military science, was too terrible to contemplate. It would mean that everything he had learned, every principle he had mastered, every calculation he trusted, was obsolete. It would mean that his nation's soldiers were dying not because they lacked courage or skill, but because they belonged to the wrong economic system. On August 18, 1944, Major Klaus Richter was still a believer in German military superiority. He had survived Poland, France, and Russia. He had seen the Wehrmacht at its peak and in its decline. He understood logistics better than most generals understood tactics. 24 hours later, that belief would begin to crack, and within a month,
It would shatter completely. The first impossibility. The report arrived at 14:35 hours on August 20th via teleprinter from Heeresgruppe B headquarters in Saint-Germain-en-Laye. Richter was eating a late lunch, black bread and ersatz coffee, when Lieutenant Vogel brought it to his desk, the paper still warm from the machine. "Sir, from General Feuchtinger's 21st Panzer Division, reconnaissance report." He marked it priority. Richter set down his coffee and scanned the header. Hans von Feuchtinger was a solid officer, not given to exaggeration. His division was deployed south of Paris, conducting delaying actions against Patton's advance. If Feuchtinger flagged something as priority, it warranted attention. The first paragraph was routine. American advance elements probing toward Chartres, engagement ranges, estimated force composition. Then came the second paragraph, and Richter had to reread it 3 times. At 2100 hours on August 19th, division reconnaissance elements observed continuous enemy vehicle movement on Route Nationale 15 south of Chartres. Initial estimate, battalion-sized convoy. Continued observation revealed uninterrupted traffic flow for duration of 6-hour surveillance period. Revised estimate, brigade-sized logistical movement. Vehicle density, approximately 80 to 100 vehicles per kilometer. Column extends beyond reconnaissance range. All vehicles display full illumination despite clear weather and moonlight. Appears to be complete abandonment of light discipline. No attempt at concealment or dispersion. Request immediate Luftwaffe interdiction. Richter set the report down. Read it again. The numbers didn't make sense. 6 hours of continuous traffic at 80 vehicles per kilometer meant, he did the calculation on his notepad, meant at least 2,500 vehicles observed, with the column extending beyond visual range. A logistical movement of that scale required corps-level planning. You didn't move that many trucks without days of preparation, careful route scheduling, layover points, refueling stations. "Vogel," he called. "Get me the previous reports from 21st Panzer, last 72 hours." While the lieutenant fetched the files, Richter walked to the situation map. American forward positions were marked in blue. Patton's Third Army spearheads had reached Chartres 2 days ago. The supply bases were marked in red, still clustered around the Normandy beachheads, 300 miles away. The distance was the point. The distance was what made this impossible. Vogel returned with a folder. Richter spread the reconnaissance summaries across his desk. August 18th. Heavy vehicle traffic observed on multiple routes. Estimate battalion-sized supply convoy. August 17th. Continuous enemy logistics movement, more extensive than normal resupply operation. August 16th. Unusual volume of truck traffic. The pattern was building. This wasn't a single convoy. This was something else. Oberst Schmidt appeared in the doorway, his limp more pronounced than usual. The damp weather aggravated his Stalingrad wounds. "You've seen Feuchtinger's report?" "Reading it now." "It's nonsense," Schmidt said flatly. "He's overestimating." Frightened observers in the dark, seeing the same vehicles multiple times. "Feuchtinger is one of our best reconnaissance commanders." "Feuchtinger is tired. They're all tired. 6 hours of continuous traffic? Impossible. No army moves supplies like that. It violates every principle of security." Richter wanted to agree, should agree, but he'd been studying American logistics for months now,
and a pattern had emerged that troubled him. The Americans didn't follow German doctrine. They didn't seem to follow any doctrine.
They improvised, adapted, overwhelmed through sheer volume rather than elegant planning. "I want aerial reconnaissance," Richter said. "Full photo coverage of Route Nationale 152 from Paris to Chartres and beyond. Tomorrow morning, first light." Schmidt snorted. "You want to waste Luftwaffe resources photographing trucks? I want to confirm or refute this report with objective data." "Fine, photograph trucks." Meanwhile, Patton is still advancing, still burning fuel he doesn't have, still stretching his supply lines past the breaking point. In 3 days, maybe 4 at most, his tanks will be stationary. Then we counterattack and push them back into the sea. Schmidt tapped the map with his riding crop, a gesture he'd retained from his cavalry days. "Physics, Richter. You can't outrun physics. The Americans are about to learn that lesson." After Schmidt left, Richter returned to Feuchtinger's report. One detail kept catching his attention. All vehicles display full illumination despite clear weather and moonlight. Headlights. In a combat zone? At night? Every manual, every field regulation, every tactical doctrine emphasized light discipline. You moved at night to avoid air attack. You moved with minimal illumination to avoid artillery targeting. This was basic fieldcraft taught to every private. Either the Americans were incompetent, or they didn't care about air attack, or they had such complete air superiority that normal precautions were irrelevant, or this was some kind of deception. Make the Germans think a huge convoy was exposed, lure in bombers, ambush them. Richter made a note. Request fighter escort for reconnaissance aircraft. The Americans had proven themselves adept at setting traps. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept running calculations, trying to fit Feuchtinger's observations into known logistical frameworks. A brigade-sized convoy moving continuously for 6 hours. Assuming average convoy speed of 35 kilometers per hour, that was 210 kilometers of road covered. If vehicles maintained 50-meter spacing, standard for daytime movement, absurdly close for night movement, that meant over 4,000 trucks. 4,000 trucks in a single convoy. The number was staggering. The Wehrmacht didn't have 4,000 operational trucks in all of France. This had to be multiple convoys misidentified as one, or errors in observation, or... At 03 hours, Richter gave up on sleep and returned to his office. He pulled every logistics report from France for the past 2 weeks and began creating a master spreadsheet. Observed convoy sizes, frequency, routes, times. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. American supply movements had increased by 300% since the breakout from Normandy. Where German units reported seeing a dozen trucks per day in early August, they now reported hundreds. The Americans weren't just maintaining their advance, they were accelerating it while simultaneously increasing the volume of supplies forward. According to every model Richter knew, this should be impossible. Supply efficiency decreased with distance. Attrition increased. Coordination became more difficult. The Americans should be experiencing severe logistics friction by now. Unless they had so many trucks that normal attrition rates didn't matter. Unless they had such overwhelming numbers that they could afford inefficiency. Unless they were operating on a scale that made German calculations irrelevant. No, Richter thought,
That's impossible. No nation has infinite resources. The British exhausted themselves fighting us. The Soviets survive on Lend-Lease. The Americans are just the latest in a series of enemies who overextend and collapse. It's the pattern of this war. But doubt had entered his mind, cold and insidious as November rain. At 9 hours on August 21st, Lieutenant Vogel brought the aerial reconnaissance photographs. There were 12 images taken from 15,000 feet by a lone Focke-Wulf 189 that had barely made it back to base after encountering American fighters. Richter spread them across the table under the bright desk lamp. The first photo showed Route Nationale 152 south of Dreux. The second showed a section near Chartres. The third showed the highway north of Orleans. In every photograph, the road was solid with vehicles. Not just vehicles, a continuous, unbroken line of trucks. The image quality was poor, but even through the grain and blur, the scale was undeniable. The convoy was a single organism, a mechanical serpent that stretched across 3 photographs taken over 90 kilometers of road. "Mein Gott," Vogel whispered. Richter picked up the photograph from Chartres and held it to the light. He could see individual trucks now, each one casting a small shadow in the morning sun. GMC emblems were visible on some. The American Deuce and a Half, their standard 2.5-ton cargo truck. He'd seen intelligence files on them. Reliable, simple, mass-produced. Each one could carry 3 tons of cargo at 45 miles per hour. He counted vehicles in a 1-kilometer section of road. 38 trucks. Applied that density to the full convoy length visible in the photographs, over 3,400 vehicles. And the photographs showed only a fraction of the route. Feuchtingter's report wasn't exaggerated. If anything, it was conservative. "Get me Heeresgruppe B on the secure line," Richter said quietly. "I need to speak with their intelligence chief. Then contact the Luftwaffe liaison. I want to know why this convoy hasn't been attacked." "Sir, the Luftwaffe says..." Vogel hesitated. "Says what?" "They attempted interdiction last night. 6 Ju-88 bombers from Jagdgeschwader 3. Only 2 returned. The Americans have layered air defense across the entire route. Fighters, anti-aircraft artillery, radar-directed guns. The pilot who made it back said the night sky was solid with tracer fire." Richter set down the photograph. His hands were steady, but something cold was settling in his chest. This wasn't just a large convoy. This was a system. The trucks, the air cover, the anti-aircraft screen. It was integrated, defended, continuous. "How many trucks do we estimate the Americans have landed in France?" he asked. Vogel consulted a ledger. Current intelligence estimate, 25,000 vehicles of all types. "Update that estimate," Richter said. "Based on these photographs, current observation reports, and assuming similar scale on other routes, I'd estimate they've landed at least 75,000 vehicles, probably more." "Sir, that's..." Vogel paused. "That's 3 times our entire Western Front vehicle park." "I know. But where are they getting them?" It was the right question. The terrible question. The question that led to the abyss. Where were they getting them? How were they producing them? How were they shipping them? How were they maintaining them? How were they fueling them? How were they coordinating them? And most importantly, if they could do this with trucks, what else could they do? Richter's coffee had gone cold again.
Outside the bunker, he could hear the muffled sound of rain. The concrete walls felt closer than usual, pressing in. He looked at the photograph again, that endless line of vehicles stretching to the horizon. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I need you to compile a comprehensive report. Every observation of American logistics movements in France for the past 30 days. Every convoy sighting, every supply dump, every indication of their transport capacity. Cross-reference with known American production figures, landing records, and fuel consumption data. I want a complete picture." "Yes, sir." "For what purpose?" "For what purpose?" "To prove himself wrong, ideally. To find the flaw in the system. To confirm that this was unsustainable, temporary, an aberration that would collapse under its own weight. Or to confirm his growing fear that they were fighting an enemy for whom logistics, the constraining factor of all warfare, simply didn't apply. For analysis, Richter said, we need to understand what we're facing. After Vogel left, Richter sat alone with the photographs. He picked up the one from Schartz and held it close. In the grainy image, he could just make out tiny figures next to the trucks, drivers probably, during a brief halt. American soldiers. The enemy. But what he really saw was capability, organization. Scale. The photograph was proof, hard physical evidence captured from 15,000 feet up, that everything he understood about military logistics was being rewritten in real time by the nation he'd been taught to dismiss as militarily incompetent. The calculation was simple. If they could do this in August, what would they do in September, October, when they reached Germany itself? For the first time since joining the Wehrmacht, Major Klaus Richter felt the cold certainty of defeat settling in his bones. Not because of tanks or planes or brave soldiers, because of trucks. Because the enemy had solved the fundamental problem of modern war, distance, with crude, overwhelming volume. The arithmetic had changed, and he was only beginning to comprehend what that meant. It's a profound moment when a lifetime of military doctrine is invalidated by a single reconnaissance photo. What piece of evidence do you think would be most shocking to a professional soldier convinced of his own superiority? We'd be fascinated to read your perspective in the comments. And if you appreciate these deep dives into the human side of history, consider subscribing for more stories like this. The reports that couldn't be true. The report landed on Richter's desk at 11 hours on August 25th with a classification stamp he'd rarely seen, Blitz, Commander's Eyes Only. It came from Foreign Armies West, the Wehrmacht intelligence branch responsible for monitoring Allied forces. The analysis was compiled by Oberst Friedrich August Freiherr von der Heydt, a paratrooper officer known for his sober assessments and hatred of sugar-coated intelligence. Von der Heydt didn't sugarcoat this one. Subject: American Logistics Capacity Assessment, France Theater. Based on observation data from 12 to 24 August 1944, Foreign Armies West estimates the American military is currently operating a continuous supply convoy designated Red Ball Express, name confirmed via Signals Intelligence Intercept. Estimated parameters. Length of convoy: in excess of 600 kilometers. Number of vehicles: minimum 5,000, possibly as high as 6,000. Tonnage delivered: 12,500 tons per day. Fuel consumption, convoy operations alone, 300,000 gallons per day.
Personnel: estimated 23,000 drivers, mechanics, and support staff. Operating schedule: 20 hours per day, 7 days per week. Assessment: this represents the largest logistics operation in military history. For comparison, the Wehrmacht's entire daily supply distribution to Army Group B, approximately 180,000 men, currently averages 3,200 tons. The American convoy is delivering supplies to forward elements at nearly 4 times our Army Group rate. Note: initial reports were discounted as observation error. However, consistent data from multiple independent sources, including captured documents, signals intercepts, and aerial reconnaissance, confirm the scale. Recommend immediate strategic reassessment of enemy logistics capacity. Richter read it twice, then a third time. Then he pulled out his calculator and began checking von der Heydt's mathematics. 12,500 tons per day. That was the weight of a small warship, delivered daily, every day. The GMC Deuce and a Half could carry 2.5 tons of cargo. To move 12,500 tons required 5,000 truckloads. If each truck made one round trip every 48 hours, 240 miles each way, accounting for loading, unloading, rest stops, you needed 10,000 trucks in the system to maintain that flow. 10,000 trucks! More than twice his initial estimate. More than the entire Wehrmacht vehicle park in France. And 300,000 gallons of fuel just to operate the convoy. That was more fuel than 3 German panzer divisions consumed in a week. The Americans were burning that much fuel just to deliver more fuel. The waste was obscene. And yet, Richter pulled out another report, this one from Army Group B's quartermaster section. German fuel allocation for August: 15,000 tons for all of France. American fuel consumption: estimated 60,000 tons monthly just for Patton's Third Army alone. 4 times the fuel, 4 times the ammunition, 4 times the food, 4 times everything. Impossible, he muttered, but the word had lost its conviction. Oberst Schmidt appeared at his door, waving a similar report. Have you seen this fantasy von der Heydt is distributing? 12,500 tons daily? Where would they even get that much material? From America, Richter said quietly. Don't be absurd. The Atlantic is 3,000 miles wide. The logistics of shipping alone are apparently not a problem for them. Richter gestured to his desk covered in reports. The numbers are consistent across every source. This isn't exaggeration. This is happening. Schmidt limped to the desk and jabbed his finger at the von der Heydt report. Then explain to me how they maintain it. You're the logistics expert. Tell me how they supply 6,000 trucks that are consuming 300,000 gallons of fuel daily just to move supplies. The mathematics become circular. They'd need trucks to supply the trucks supplying the front. It was a good question, the best question, the question that should have exposed the entire operation as unsustainable. Richter had been thinking about nothing else for 3 days. Forward supply points, he said. They're establishing fuel dumps every 50 miles along the route. The trucks refuel without returning to base. And he paused, still not quite believing his own conclusion. They're flying fuel in, C-47 transport aircraft. We've observed them landing at captured airfields with drums of gasoline. Flying fuel, Schmidt repeated, his voice flat with disbelief. And building pipelines. We've received reports from Cherbourg about construction crews laying pipeline from the port to inland depots. They're literally building permanent fuel infrastructure as they advance. Schmidt sat down heavily. That's insane. The cost alone is apparently irrelevant. Richter opened another file. Captured American documents from the 90th Infantry Division, their quartermaster logs. Listen to this. Requisitioned 450 jerry cans from supply depot. Lost or damaged en route. No replacement request submitted. Excess stock available. They lost 40% of their fuel containers and didn't even file a report because they have excess stock available. They're that wasteful? They're that wealthy. The distinction was important. Wastefulness implied incompetence. Wealth implied a different kind of warfare entirely. Richter stood and walked to his situation map. Small pins marked every known American supply dump, fuel point, vehicle park, and logistics hub. The pattern was clear: a network. Not a supply line. A line could be cut, interdicted, broken. This was a web, redundant and resilient. Cut one strand, and the system routed around it. We've been calculating based on our constraints, Richter said. Limited vehicles, limited fuel, limited replacement capacity. What if those constraints don't apply to them? Every army has constraints, Schmidt argued. It's a law of nature. What if their constraint is so high that it's effectively unlimited for this theater? What if they have 100,000 trucks? What if they can produce 50,000 more this month? Propaganda. Is it? Richter pulled out a captured copy of an American magazine, Life, from June 1944. Vogel had found it in a shot-up Jeep. The cover showed a factory floor in Detroit, rows of assembly lines stretching to infinity, each line producing one GMC truck every 5 minutes. The caption read, "The Arsenal of Democracy, 24,000 trucks per month from this plant alone." Schmidt stared at the photograph. This is their propaganda. They want us to believe they're invincible. Then why haven't they distributed it to their soldiers? This was found in a wrecked vehicle. It's a civilian magazine for American readers. They're not trying to demoralize us. They're informing their own population. The distinction unsettled Schmidt. Richter could see it in his face, the first crack in the armor of certainty. If the Americans were producing 24,000 trucks monthly from a single factory, and they had dozens of such factories, then the scale of their logistics wasn't an anomaly, it was their default state of operations. "I need coffee," Schmidt muttered, standing. "Real coffee, not this ersatz poison. Do you remember real coffee, Richter?" Vaguely. "The Americans drink it by the gallon, fresh brewed, with sugar and cream, at the front lines." Schmidt limped toward the door, then stopped. "You know what really bothers me about these reports? It's not the numbers, it's the carelessness. They drive with their headlights on, they broadcast their positions on open radio. They abandon broken-down trucks on the roadside rather than repair them. It's as if they don't care that we're watching." "Because they don't," Richter said. "What can we do about it? We can't interdict them. They own the air. We can't attack their supply depots. They're too far behind their lines. We can't even calculate their logistics limitations because they don't seem to have any that matter." After Schmidt left, Richter returned to his desk and began a new analysis. He titled it, "American Logistics Capacity Assessment, Strategic Implications." The first implication was obvious: Patton would not halt.
The calculation that had seemed so certain on August 19th that Third Army would run out of fuel within 48 hours was now revealed as wishful thinking. They had fuel, they had ammunition, they had everything. The second implication was more troubling. If this was their logistics capability in France, what would they do in Germany? The Rhine was 200 miles from the current front. At their current rate of advance in supply, they could reach it in 3 weeks. And there was no indication they'd slow down once they crossed it. The third implication was the one Richter struggled to write down, struggled even to think clearly. German military doctrine is predicated on superiority of training, tactics, and operational art to offset material disadvantages. This approach succeeded against Poland and France, whose logistics capacity was comparable to our own. It has partially succeeded against the Soviet Union, whose logistics capacity is poor but compensated by depth and manpower. American logistics capacity appears to be qualitatively different. They do not seek efficiency or elegance. They achieve overwhelming volume through industrial mass production. Their doctrine appears to be manufacture more material than can be lost, transport more supplies than can be consumed, replace losses faster than they accumulate. If this assessment is accurate, traditional German advantages in tactical excellence become irrelevant. Superior tactics do not compensate for a 10-to-1 disadvantage in artillery ammunition. Better trained soldiers cannot advance without fuel. Operational brilliance cannot overcome strategic material superiority of this magnitude. The American logistical system represents an existential threat to German defensive operations. Current Wehrmacht doctrine has no counter to an enemy whose primary weapon is industrial abundance. He sat back and reread what he'd written. It was close to defeatism, close to treason, but it was also mathematically true. The telephone on his desk rang. It was the secure line from Berlin. Major Richter, this is Oberst Meyer-Welker, OKW Operations. The Führer's headquarters has questions about your recent logistics assessments regarding the American supply convoy. Specifically, you've estimated their capacity at 12,500 tons daily. General Jodl finds this figure implausible and requests your supporting data. Richter felt his stomach tighten. This was the test. Either defend his analysis or soften it to match expectations. The figure comes from Foreign Armies West, confirmed by my independent analysis of observational data, Richter said carefully. Multiple reliable sources. The Führer believes the figure is inflated for propaganda purposes. He notes that such a supply volume would exceed the entire Wehrmacht's logistics capacity for Army Group B. He finds it unlikely that the Americans, for all their material advantages, have achieved a fourfold superiority in a single theater. Because you don't want to believe it, thought. Because accepting it means accepting that we've already lost. Sir, I can provide detailed sourcing for every element of the calculation. Observed convoy density, vehicle counts from aerial reconnaissance, captured quartermaster logs. What the Führer wants to know, Meyer-Welker interrupted, his voice dropping, is whether your assessment accounts for the possibility of American deception operations. Could they be running empty trucks in circles to create the illusion of abundance? Empty trucks in circles? consuming 300,000 gallons of fuel daily to create an illusion? Richter closed his eyes. Sir, with respect, the supplies are arriving at frontline units. American combat formations are maintaining ammunition expenditure rates we cannot match. Their fuel consumption is consistent with actual operational tempo. This is not deception. This is functioning logistics. Silence on the line. Then, prepare a revised assessment taking into account possible exaggeration factors. The Führer needs accurate intelligence, not alarmist speculation. The line went dead. Richter set down the phone and stared at his desk. Accurate intelligence that matched preconceptions. That was the order. He thought about revising his assessment, cutting the figures in half, finding ways to make the data less threatening. It would be easy. It would be career-preserving. It would also be a lie. And lies in military planning killed soldiers. He turned to a fresh page and began writing a new report. This one more detailed, more thoroughly sourced, more devastating in its implications. If Berlin wanted to ignore reality, that was their choice. But Klaus Richter would not contribute to institutional delusion. The truth was this. They were facing an enemy who had turned logistics itself into a weapon. The Red Ball Express wasn't just supplying an army. It was demonstrating American industrial philosophy. That quantity has a quality all its own. That overwhelming volume can substitute for efficiency. That economics ultimately determines military outcomes. And if that was true, then Germany had lost the war the moment American factories started running at full capacity. The report took him 6 hours to complete. When he finished, it was dark outside, and the bunker's lights had taken on the harsh fluorescent glare of evening. His coffee had gone cold for the 4th time that day. His hand ached from writing. He signed the document, sealed it in an envelope marked for Field Marshal Model's eyes only, and handed it to Vogel for delivery. "Sir," Vogel said quietly, "should I prepare a softer version for wider distribution?" Richter looked at the young lieutenant. Vogel was 23, educated, from a good family. He had his whole life ahead of him, assuming any of them survived the next 6 months. "No," Richter said. "The truth is the truth, whether it's comfortable or not." That night, unable to sleep, Richter walked outside for the first time in days. The East Prussian night was cool, almost autumn-like. Stars filled the sky, undimmed by city lights. Those had been blacked out for years now. He thought about the American convoy, 800 miles to the west. Right now, at this moment, 6,000 trucks were driving through the night with their headlights blazing. Drivers, many of them barely trained, many of them black soldiers whom Nazi doctrine dismissed as racially inferior, were hauling tonnage that would supply entire armies. They drove with their lights on because they could, because they owned the skies, because they had so many trucks that losing a few to enemy action was acceptable. Because their doctrine was abundance, not conservation. Standing in the darkness of Prussia, Richter understood with sudden clarity. This was what defeat looked like. Not dramatic, not glorious, just mathematics. Just numbers growing too large to manage. Advantages too wide to overcome. Resources too abundant to exhaust. The GMC Deuce and a Half had become more than a truck. It was a symbol of American industrial might, of a different way of waging war, of a nation that could outproduce any adversary and overwhelm them with sheer material volume. And there was no counter to it, no brilliant tactic, no operational art, no secret weapon, just the cold reality of arithmetic. Germany was being buried under a mountain of American trucks, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that could stop it. The arithmetic of disintegration. September arrived with the kind of crystalline weather that made warfare beautiful from a distance. Clear skies, warm days, cool nights. Perfect conditions for movement, for logistics, for the kind of mechanized operations that had made German arms famous. For the Americans, it meant the Red Ball Express ran at peak efficiency. For the Germans, it meant watching their defeat arrive in convoy increments of 2.5 tons at a time. Richter's daily routine had become a kind of archaeological excavation through layers of bad news. Morning intelligence briefings brought reconnaissance reports from France. Afternoon radio intercepts provided glimpses of American supply coordination. Evening analyses compiled the day's observations into comprehensive horror. On September 3rd, he received a report that shattered what remained of his professional composure. It came from a captured American lieutenant, a quartermaster officer from the 79th Infantry Division. The man had been wounded during a skirmish near Metz and was recovering in a Wehrmacht field hospital. During interrogation, he casually mentioned his unit's supply status. The interrogator, sensing something significant, had transcribed the conversation verbatim. Q. What was your unit's ammunition allocation for the Metz operation? A. Allocation? We don't really work on allocations. We requisition what we need. Q. You must have some limit. Daily tonnage? Weekly quota? Not really. If we're low on something, we radio back. A truck brings it, sometimes the same day. Q. This seems improbable. Your supply system allows unlimited requisition? I mean, I guess there's limits somewhere up the chain, but at division level, we order it, it arrives. Our biggest problem is finding places to store everything. Q. Storage is your primary logistics concern? Yeah, we've got dumps with thousands of shells just sitting there, more than we can shoot. Sometimes we have to move supplies back because forward positions are overflowing. It's kind of wasteful, honestly. Richter read this exchange 3 times. Then he walked to the latrine and vomited. Storage. Storage was their primary logistics concern. The German military was rationing every rifle round, every liter of fuel, every can of food. Field commanders received daily allocation reports specifying exactly how many shells they could fire, which operations could be supplied, which units would go hungry. Every decision was a calculation of scarcity. The Americans had too much, so much that storage became a problem. So much that they moved supplies backward because forward dumps were full. When Richter returned to his office, Oberst Schmidt was waiting, reading the interrogation transcript. This prisoner is obviously lying, Schmidt said, or exaggerating. Americans have a tendency to boast. He's not boasting, Richter said quietly. He's complaining about inefficiency. He thinks his supply system is wasteful. It is wasteful. Yes, because they can afford to be. That's the point. Schmidt set down the transcript. He looked older than usual, the lines on his face deeper. His